we'll go ahead and jump right back in. We're in the middle of Esther chapter 6, and we'll kind of jump back and review a little bit so we can catch up to where we were and try to finish off the story. It was a cold and rainy autumn in October 1415. In France, the English king, Henry V, is pressing through under the flag of St. George. He thinks he's got God on his side. He wants to take the French crown. He started off with about 12,000 men, but things had turned against him. He had sieged another area for far too long. It had dragged out far longer than he wanted it to, and as a result, he lost over half of his army, not to the swords of the French, but to dysentery, disease, just terrible things as they ran low on supplies. So that drug on far too long, and as that wrapped up, he decides he's not going to return home, which is what everyone thought he should have done, which is what his men thought he should have done, but rather he was going to retreat to an area of safety, kind of regroup, and maybe continue on the campaign. So he and what's left of his army move back and get near this place, this small village called Agincourt. And he finds himself blocked off by some 40,000 Frenchmen. These are the people he was trying to attack, trying to take the crown from, and they were stuck there. It started to rain overnight on October 24th. By October 25th in the morning, this pathway at Agincourt between the French and the English was just nasty swamp, bog type of area. The English are terrified. The French think that they're going to just absolutely crush the English. In fact, they're so confident of this that the French are kind of arguing with themselves about what English lords they're going to ransom off to and collect money. So they have a great standoff and kind of just stare at one another for a long time because the French think the English are just going to give up and surrender. They're defeated. The French have shining armor, knights, well-trained people. The English have just really peasants, assorted peasants, and regular folks that making up the army. But the king, not deterred, Henry V, in his early 20s, thought to be very bold and reckless, advanced his men a few hundred yards forward and set up some spikes. They hammered some spikes into the ground so that the French cavalry wouldn't be able to run into them. And then they raised their bows. They didn't have much equipment, but they had these special bows made of yew wood, long bows. And they started just raining down arrows on the French. Thousands of arrows filled the sky. It's all they had, arrows and bows and some other weapons, but mostly arrows and bows. And they just peppered the French with these arrows. And so the French get all mad about this and angry, charge over in the middle of this swampland. But what they thought was going to be a great and easy victory for them turned out to be exactly the opposite. Their horses started getting stuck in the mud. The French armor started weighing them down. As the knights in their heavy armor tried to walk through the mud, they would sink up to their waists because their armor was so heavy. And they just get hit by more and more arrows. And as the lines of more French tried to come, they'd get trapped between the dead bodies of the French who had attacked first, turned into a horrible mess. And some 10,000 French lay dead at the feet of the English, and the rest of the army scattered. And the French lost only a few hundred men. This is thought to be one of the greatest reversals in fate and reversals in scenario in military history. What we see in chapters 6 and 7 of Esther is that same type of thing. The great reversal, the moment that we've been waiting for, that we've been building up for, is here. We'll review a little bit in chapter 6 to get to where we were. The first 3 verses say that one night the king could not sleep, so one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers, who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And then the king said, well, what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's servants who attended him said, nothing has been done for this. The king can't sleep. There's so many things he could have called for at this moment. The providence of God is working behind the scenes. He could have called for wives, wine, food, musicians, entertainment, whatever it was, but he called for the written records, the Chronicles of the Persians, to be read. They kept records of everything. It's how we know so much about them today. And it's boring enough material that maybe the king thought it put him right back to sleep. So they bring out just the right parchment or leather, whatever they wrote on at that time, just the right one that had in it the story of how Mordecai had saved the king by uncovering a plot, fulfilling his duty to honor the king and protect the king of whatever government that a religious person finds himself in. So Ahasuerus is an emotional king, an angry king, yes, but he's also a generous king. He rewards faithful service to him. He rewards governors and military leaders that he's had. He gives them yearly stipends, some of them, kind of a retirement plan. Very generous was this king, as well as being a king of great anger. So he's thinking and kind of ruminating now on what is it that we can do to reward this man who uncovered the plot for his life. And that's where we get the next section. Just so happens that Haman has come in. If you remember from the end of the last chapter, Haman's friends and family have given him the idea of, I know you got a problem with Mordecai. You can't be happy while you see him in the king's gate. Just ask for him to be killed off early. This is some 9 months or more before that great destruction of the Jews that he had planned. And he's trying to go in and get a little bit of an early kill, you might say. So in verse 4 through verse 10, so the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he'd prepared for him. The king's servant said to him, "Haman is there standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in," because you can't go in the king's presence again, not even Haman, without invitation. So Haman came in, and the king asked him, "What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, this is an indictment of Haman right here. Haman thought in his heart, "Well, who would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse, which the king has ridden, and which has a royal crest placed on his head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered by the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor, and parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" And the king said to Haman, "Well, hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew who sits within the king's gate." You can just imagine the color drain from his face when he hears this. "Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken." Right at the exact moment that Haman needed to be here is when all of this begins to unfold. The perfect moment. The king can't sleep. Mordecai hasn't been rewarded for what it is that he has been rewarded, or what should have been rewarded earlier on, but was just kind of mistaken. Everything is just right. The king is just now hearing about this. And so Haman comes in with fully intending to get Mordecai hung early. Instead, he's distracted by his favorite topic, which is himself. He turns it and thinks about himself, thinking, who would the king delight to honor more than me when the king makes this request? And Haman creates a laundry list of things that are just impractical things that he wanted for himself. You remember about the character of Haman, that he is a man whom his whole self-worth, his identity, depends on how everyone else views him. If everyone else is not looking at him a certain way, if they're not thinking the right thoughts about him, he's upset. Remember that everything that he had in his life, he even said with his own mouth, availed him nothing so long as Mordecai the Jew stands at the king's gate, rather. Everything, every bit of Haman's self-worth comes from everyone looking at him a certain way. That's why he lists these things. These are impractical things, things that the next day, the next week, everyone would have already forgotten. But it's all for show. Haman is obsessed with how others view him. Of all the things he could have asked for, he could have asked for a business, tax exemption, stipend, anything like that, practical things that would have benefited his family. He didn't think about his family. He thought about himself and how he could get everyone else to think of him as an honorable man. And so that's what he concentrated on. And so the king said, much to Haman's dismay, "Do it all for Mordecai the Jew, your arch nemesis." And that's what we get in the next 4 verses. Verses 11 to 14. So Haman took the robe and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city square. So he's having to put the stuff on Mordecai. That's probably a little bit uncomfortable. Can you imagine that as an uncomfortable and awkward situation, having to get your arch enemy ready to go out and then parade him about the square? Led him on horseback through the city square and proclaimed before him, "Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all of his friends everything that had happened to him, the wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him." And while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So everything Haman wanted for himself, all the glory and honor that he wanted for himself, all of a sudden he has to give that to his archenemy. He wanted to give Haman the gallows. He wanted to give him death, but no, he had to give him the things that he himself wanted the most. Incredible. They were to be done for his enemy. So he had to take Haman around, parade him around, doing everything that he wanted. Haman took this as a personal insult to himself. He took this as an insult to his own pride. That is a critical note on the character of Haman, because a humble person would not have viewed someone else getting some praise, someone else getting some honor as a bad thing, as something that humiliates him, especially if you're the second in command in Persia, which is essentially what Haman was. But he took this as an insult to himself. The humble in spirit do not see the elevation of someone else as an insult to themselves. That is so key. That's as practical of a note as it gets. And it's worth noting because all of these things that we're noting that Haman does are the elements of his character, the seeds of his character that make him who he is. What accumulates and makes him evil are a whole bunch of just bad character traits. Traits that on their own don't seem like much, don't seem like serious flaws, but together make him the villain that he is. So he views this instance as Mordecai getting honored as just a terrible insult. In verse 12, not only does he run back to his house, he has covered his head. You can just see him, whatever they're wearing, these cloak-type garments. He has covered himself and he is running away. He doesn't even want to be seen by anyone else. Of course, no one standing to the side, would have thought anything less of Haman because he had to honor someone else. That just doesn't happen. But Haman, in his pride, took it that way. If someone else's success, as a practical note, causes us to feel like Haman has felt, makes us feel less than valuable in the eyes of God, it makes us feel bad. If someone else getting an accomplishment makes us feel terrible or envious or even a little bit uncomfortable, like we should be getting that honor, or that it makes us look bad, as if people are looking at us to begin with. We think they are, but they're not quite frequently. That is a symptom of pride in the life. That is something we need to root out. If someone else gets honor or riches or wealth, even these material things, which in the Old Testament God frequently notes come from him, like things like 1 Chronicles 29, 12 to 13, and Proverbs 21, 4, these gifts come down from God. We should be excited for others when good things happen to them, when things good happen in their lives. Not only especially if it's of the household of faith, because we should be happy with them to begin with because we're esteeming others higher than ourselves. But then it should encourage us to think, well, that's great. It's possible for me as well. That's what we need to train to do when we're seeing the successes of others. Because Haman cannot do this, he's going to be absolutely shattered. And he's going to be in the perfect position in the next chapter to, when everything is revealed against him by Esther, in the perfect place to fall. Mordecai did not receive the reward for what he did at the moment that he did it. That is a practical point for start, that we don't always get rewarded immediately in the moment. And that's okay. We need to be able to be content with that. We need to be able to train our minds to be content with maybe not even being rewarded in this lifetime. If we can accept that and accept that the bulk of the reward, full 99.9 repeating of the reward, comes after the end of the Christian life, if we can be comfortable with that, we are much better able to tolerate day-to-day living because we're not constantly looking for God to give us some sort of handout or reward. The delay in the recognition is what saves Mordecai's life. If Mordecai had been rewarded early when he found out this plot, Haman might have gotten what he wanted right here. He might have gotten what he wanted. You remember, Xerxes, Ahasuerus, just gives Haman the authority to do whatever he wants. When Haman tells the king that, hey, there's a people here, they're not following your laws, I think we should wipe them out. The king says, hey, do whatever's good to you. It's most likely that the king would have thought nothing of one particular subject getting eliminated, wiped out. But it was this very thing that saved Mordecai's life. Because as Haman runs back to tell his wife everything that happened, now there's no way you can ask the king to kill Mordecai now. He's just been honored in front of the entire Persian nation. So when there's a delay in what we plant and what we harvest in life, maybe even on the eternal time horizon, that's okay. It was that delay in the reward that saved Mordecai's life in this instance. So he returns to his house with his heads covered, and he starts to realize not only him, but his family, which is so interesting, and we'll notice it in a second, that there's a change in the perspective of Haman's family, who once were so supportive of him and him killing off Mordecai early and everything that he was doing. But then they start to realize, oh, this may not work out the way we thought it was going to work out. This happens in real time sometimes in the Bible, where the enemies of God see the providence of God happening in real time. When the Israelites start to cross over the Red Sea in Exodus 14, and the Egyptians see all this stuff, you remember they make the comment that, oh, the Lord fights for them. They see in real time that God is on the side of their adversaries. There are times when the people who oppose the people of God start to realize there is nothing they can do to stand against them. And that's exactly what we see. These are all ordinary events we've noted throughout this study. These are ordinary events that God works to His ultimate purposes, but they are not separate and independent from our need to take action as well. Mordecai uncovered the plot for the king because he was being a good civil servant. He was working within the government that he found himself, doing what was moral and right. It was all of that that allowed this to happen. Had he been like, I don't belong here, I'm just an exile, I'm not a citizen of this Persian place anyways, I'm just going to let this assassination plot go through. He did not do that. No, he took action. And that is exactly what it is that saves his life. So let's look at this textual question, because we went quickly over it back when we were doing Esther chapter 5. And there's a lot of text on the board. But so we just read in Esther 6, that verse on the bottom, that Haman's family, his wise men, pretty much tell him, if Mordecai, before whom you've begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, then you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. Now that's a brand new development, because just 2 seconds ago in Esther chapter 5, look at what they were saying. It was their idea to try to oppose Mordecai and to get him killed. Esther 5:14, then his wife Zeresh and all of his friends said to him, let a gallows be made 50 cubits high in the morning, suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it, then go merrily with the king to the banquet, and the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. What is going on here? What's going on is that even evil people, even these pagan people, are recognizing providence unfolding, the work of God unfolding before their very eyes. So he comes home, he tells everything that has just happened. In Persia, to the wise men, it looks like he's got kind of his own personal wise men here. This would have been what happened to Haman, this great humiliation and this great reversal. This would have been to them, as a superstitious people, a prophetic omen of impending doom, pretty much. Everyone, his wife, his friends, his family, are recognizing the tide of providence is turning. Something is happening here that they don't quite understand, but they know it has something to do with who Mordecai is. That's why they know it. Look at that verse when they tell him in verse 13, if Mordecai, before you become to fall, is of Jewish descent. Why would they point that out? Because they're noticing that, okay, something here has to do with these people, these Jewish people, and the fact that God repeatedly delivers them. They have a reputation, even now, even in exile, as being people who God delivers. And they've always had kind of that reputation. You remember when they first leave the land of Egypt, they're coming through and they're approaching Jericho. And the spies go into Jericho and are stashed away in Rahab's house. They have a conversation with Rahab. And she tells them what's really going on within the mind and the spirit, you might say, of the people of Jericho when they heard about the Israelites coming forward. And remember, she said that our hearts melted within us. Why? Because word of what had happened in Egypt is already spread. They know that this group of people has the hand of God behind them. They had seen this. They had seen Cyrus act favorably towards them in Persia. The Persians had seen Darius act favorably towards them as well and through past times. So this is not just an ethnic observation of, oh, this guy's a Jew. It's a theological recognition that they're saying, if you set yourself against one of these people, you have doomed yourself. And that's essentially what his wise men say. So he's got wise men here as well in verse 13. And you remember, these aren't just guys who are the legal experts, which they are. They're not just the political advisors. They also do kind of some divination stuff. They do some astrology stuff as well, which is, of course, nonsense, but they took it very seriously. And that's why they're going to take this as a massive omen, a quote-unquote cosmic sign, a sign from the heavens or whatever God that they thought of, that, okay, you are actually beginning to fall, and that you can see that they're starting to take their distance away from Haman. They're starting to back up because they see that he has begun a downward spiral that they can't do anything about. Before we move on into chapter 7, Haman, as we've noted, only has bad things mentioned about his character. But we have to note that he, like any other villain within history, started out as just an innocent kid who grew up, series of choices, series of environments, developed him into the character that he had. He once had all the potential in the world to be anything, but he ended like this. And as a human being, that could be anyone. Haman had the same genocidal ideations and goals as the great villains of history that lived and accomplished them. You could put Haman alongside the Stalins, the Maos, and the Hitlers of history, except for the fact that he didn't succeed in his genocide. He failed because of the providence of God and of the action of human beings. But he is a human being. And he and all these other characters go to show what humans are capable of if they do not manage their own character. Because all of this started from just some seed habits, some seed character traits that grew into what he was today. And we often have this thought of, man, this guy is such a terrible guy that I would never be that way. That if I lived during the time of Israel, I wouldn't have danced around the golden calf. If I had been during the period of the judges, I wouldn't have rebelled and worshiped the pagan gods every time the judge dies, about 2 seconds after the judge dies. I think we give ourselves too much credit. There's this quote attributed to Archilochus. A lot of times it's attributed to Aristotle as well. Who really knows? But he says, we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And I think that is so critical. And it's a habit we engage in when we look back on history, when we look back on the Old Testament and think, oh, I never would have done all that stuff. Well, there's a good chance that we would have done all that stuff, and we give ourselves a little bit too much credit. Because when we're under pressure, when there's moral pressures from the outside, if we compromise in small ways in the workplace, small ways out in the way we interact with other human beings, we'll probably compromise in larger ways as well. We only perform as well as we train. When we do not prepare for being tempted, or when we overestimate our strength, when we underestimate our weaknesses, all those things together, that's when we fail. There's this principle in psychology, this effect that's been observed. It's very interesting, and I mention it even from the annals of psychology because it's backed up by Scripture. It's called moral licensing, and it's an effect where people who believe that they are virtuous, believe they're righteous, believe they're moral people, are actually more likely to engage in immoral activities, to engage in unvirtuous activities, unrighteousness, because they think themselves to be righteous. And what happens there is that they then let their guard down. And that's fully backed up, I think, by 1 Corinthians 10:12. If anyone thinks he stands, take heed lest you fall. You think you're a good person? Oh, you better be careful with that mentality. Take heed lest you fall. We need to be careful when we start thinking things like, I would have never done X, Y, Z, because that's exactly the kind of letting our guard down that results in bad character. And small bad character grows and poisons itself until it becomes Haman-like character. A good example of this is, you're probably familiar with the branch of the Navy, and the special operators in the Navy are called the Navy SEALs. Toughest guys in the world, some of them, and they have this extensive and extraordinarily difficult process of selection and training. I won't read all these things to you, but they have to go to the Navy, and then they do some basic training, some special warfare training, and then they do the really difficult Navy SEAL training, all of that stuff. All of that for the hopes to be one of the great and tough Navy SEALs that go out and do all these dangerous operations. Now, how many of the guys who go into each class do you think, in the back of their mind, think, I don't really know if I'll stick it out to the end. I don't know if when it gets really hard and really tough that I'll be able to keep going. I think maybe there is a possibility that I'll quit. Probably 0%. Probably no one thinks that they're going to be the ones who quit. Every one of them thinks they're going to be the one who pushes on and becomes one of those elite. But what's the real attrition rate? Something like 70 to 80%. Something like 7 or 8 out of 10 of these guys who fully believed they were going to push through. It's why they applied, they went through all the difficulty. They quit. They ring the bell and they line their helmets up. 100% of them thought they would push through, and 80% of them are wrong. Because no amount of mental preparation or or thinking or book reading or even training, no amount will get any one person ready for what they face when they go and start that training. It's harder than they could have possibly imagined, and many of them quit. Such is the way when we overestimate how strong we are as Christians. We think whenever some great temptation hits us that we'll rise to the occasion. All of a sudden, our morals, our righteousness will rise up and we'll do the right thing, that we'll stand up and claim God even if it costs us our life. We need to be careful with making those kind of statements and overestimating our strength. Do we need to plan and prepare for how we're going to act and pray that we have the strength to follow through? Yes, but we need to not give ourselves so much credit. Haman is human. And right as he realizes, and he and all his family realizes he's about to fall, they bring him to the next banquet, and that's where we get to Esther chapter 7. Everything is led up to this moment. This is the pinpoint moment of the text. Esther's in the palace for a reason. Mordecai told her she's in this palace perhaps for a reason. Her beauty and her good character, her graciousness, got her favor with the king and got her the queenship. The humility and conviction of Mordecai caused them to be in this national crisis where all the Jews' lives are at risk. And Haman's pride has blinded him to everything but his one singular goal, to eliminate the Jews. So it would be at this moment, this second banquet, when finally Esther stepped out and shows the world, namely the king of the world, who she is. The first two verses in Esther 7 say, "So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, 'What is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done.'" So the king is having a great time. It appears to be a banquet of wine, but it's possible that he's had a little too much. We don't know, we're not told, but he's known to be extra generous during these type of banquets. Historians say that this offer that he makes Esther, this is the third time he makes that offer, that this is the maximum he can legally offer as king. So he is literally offering her the best that he can. Whatever you want, it's up to half the kingdom. It's the most I can offer. And that's him explaining to her how much she means to him. And it's at this moment that she has him right where she needs him. This is the third time that he has made this offer. And I think it's interesting to note that he asks, "What's your request?" or "What's your petition?" and "What's your request?" This is not just a mindless repetition of his words. These two Hebrew words are distinct. The word petition here has a formal tone to it. It's about a legal request or an official request, something like that. So on a governmental side, what are you asking for? What's your petition? And then the word for request here is more of a personal, an emotional, a relational request. So he's essentially telling you, hey, whatever you want from on the legal side to the relational side, you have my entire ear. You have everything, anything you could want. You have everything. You have my ear in every capacity as your sovereign and as your husband. So she appeals to this. Let's look at the next 4 verses here. Verses 3 to 7. This is when she comes out and really asks for what she wants. And we're really going to pay attention here to the order that she makes her request known. Notice the order of the things that she expresses. Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "The adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman." So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. So she finally reveals who and what she is and what it is that she wants. This is the first time we have noted in the text that she identifies with her Jewish people, her Jewish brethren. Mordecai told her to not reveal this. And this is going to make it so powerful when she does reveal it in this moment. She responds to him in that legal language that he first approached her with, that this is my petition and this is my request. I want both a legal help and personal help. I want both official help and relational help. But she opens this up with respectful language. She first defers to the king. Look at this, what she says, that if I found favor in your sight, O king, if it pleases the king, let my life be given at my petition and my people at my request. She is framing this as if her life and her people are gifts that the king has the authority to give. She's being so respectful and warm and deferent and submissive to her husband. That is going to be the groundwork, the ramp for her making the rest of her request, and it is critical. And she goes from that warm relational request to a rational argument that we've been sold, she says in verse 4. That's referencing, she's making a pinpoint reference to the fact that there's money involved here. I know about Haman offering to pay the 10,000 talents, which he fully intended to recoup when he pillaged the Jews after they had been destroyed. But then at the end of verse 4, you know that she notes that the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. Some versions say that the loss would be great. So she's making the argument that the people, the Jewish people, are of great value to the kingdom. And whatever has been offered is not going to cover it. It's not going to compensate for all of those losses. And you also notice that during this moment, she is starting to make a differentiation in verse 4 between being just sold as slaves and being eliminated, and being exterminated, you might say. There is a difference, a moral distinction within the text of Esther when people start to be eliminated and killed. There are certain unalienable rights that are self-evident. The founders noted that Esther is noticing here, that if they had been sold as slaves, she would have held her tongue, but because they're going to be killed and eliminated, she can't. She has a moral responsibility because that unalienable right from the Creator for life is being compromised here, is being damaged here. So she has to step in. She opens with warmth and requesting mercy. She does not start by blaming Haman. We'll get to that in a minute. She's going to move from a personal plea to a public accusation and point the finger, but not before she's opened it with warmth. Not before she has approached this in a strategic way. And in fact, she needs this because it's in verse, she needs to kind of assess, how's the king going to respond to this? What's the king going to do? Do I have him on my side? And she knows this right after verse 5. Because you can see the anger of the king start to build up already in verse 5. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he?" So he doesn't even have a clue it's Haman to start. Who would dare do such a thing in his heart? So she can tell. Once she sees that he is already angry about this, she knows she's got him right where she wants him. And at that point, she is safe. And at that point, it makes the most strategic sense to, point him out. It's that wicked Haman. And Haman thought he was in a great relationship with the king and queen. He had been invited to those private dinners, which unheard of. You remember that men and women do not mingle at banquets and feasts in Persian culture like this. They have their own separate feasts. This was an unheard of honor. At the end of verse 6, Haman is terrified. He's just totally shocked at what just happened here. So she shifts. She opens with warmth. She proceeds to rational argument of why this is a bad decision for the king, why it would affect the kingdom negatively, and then moral condemnation at the end. She says, this wicked Haman. And I think we need to note that for a second, because we have to ask the question, did Esther speak evil of Haman? If you just look at this on the surface, some might say, Esther, look what she's doing. She is speaking badly about a governmental official. We're not supposed to do that as Christians. Now, that is true. The biblical narrative is clear that we are not to speak evil really of anyone, and that includes our governmental officials. Now, we're going to make a really important distinction here between personally attacking and mocking people who are in a position of government and pointing out immoral actions and moral character that is bad, that is reflected by poor actions. We have all the examples in the Old Testament. It's in the Jewish context, of course, at that time, that you're not supposed to curse a ruler of the people. Peter tells his audience that you have to honor the king. So what's Esther doing here when she says he is an adversary and wicked? Is she doing what sometimes we make the mistake of doing and should not do, which is insult governmental officials and call them names and stuff? We can point out moral corruption and we can point out immoral actions and laws and things like that, but I think we need to refrain from insulting and mocking governmental officials. That, based on the biblical precedent, it seems to be wrong from everything that I can tell. But Esther's not personally attacking Haman. She is simply noting that he is a man of poor moral character And the evidence of that is the great genocide that he's planned. Because of all of that, he is an evil man. Yes, he is. It's pointing out his moral character, not attacking of him. She's not just mocking and insulting the governmental official, the prime minister of Persia, like sometimes we do when we insult the governmental officials that we disagree with and things like that, which we shouldn't do. So she's not saying Haman is a stupid man, I disagree with this policy. She's really pointing out his evil. She's pointing out his moral character and showing that that is a problem, that his genocidal and murderous intentions make him an immoral person. That's why he's wicked, and that's why he is an adversary. So she's doing nothing wrong in this instance. The practical point to draw from that and from the rest of the text is, especially when it comes to how we speak about things on the political side and on the governmental side, is we have to differentiate between just openly mocking and disrespecting governmental officials, even if we disagree with policy decisions, and actually pointing out moral problems, condemning evil actions, pointing out when a policy is bad. There's a difference in that and just mocking and attacking someone personally. Being able to do that makes us not only rational and logical as Christians because we're engaging with issues and can break them down with logic, not with yelling and becoming emotional, but it also reflects Christ better. We look rational and we look better to those who are on the outside, which is important for ensuring that we're taken seriously and not casting a bad reflection on the church with how it is that we act and how it is we talk about governmental things. So we have the last handful of verses, which are also themselves interesting in this chapter 7. So verses 8 through 10, when the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. And then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbonah, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Now, isn't that interesting? He built the gallows right outside his house. That seems a little extreme. Well, he's going to be impaled on his own gallows right outside his house. Then the king said, hang him on it. Your Bible may say impale him on it. That's most likely what's happening here in Persia. They didn't do the hanging around the neck until dead like they do in the Westerns. It's graphic, but people get impaled on these posts and just left up there for a while. So they hanged him on it or impaled him on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath subsided. So it all comes to a head for Haman. His sin has found him out. The king, Ahasuerus, he is furious, and so he steps outside into the garden to cool off. No doubt he's thinking in the back of his mind now of, realizing his part in what is happening here. Realizing and reflecting back on that moment when Haman tricks him in a way and deceives him, and he just mindlessly gives power. Just hands the signet ring to Haman and said, hey, do whatever's good to you. So he's likely reflecting on that and planning what it is that he's going to do. How is he going to punish his second in command? Maybe at this point he wasn't quite to the point where it was a capital crime. Maybe there was some wiggle room for Haman, but Haman's going to do away with that with his own action. So Haman sees that evil was determined against him by the king. You see that in verse 7. The Hebrew seems to indicate that means he is pretty confident and knows that his fate is sealed. He knows there's really no wiggling out of this, but he still attempts. He falls over the couch begging for his life. Some historians think that he's touching the queen's garments or maybe even touching her feet, at her feet begging. Now, if that's the case, that's really bad. In Persia, it is against the law to touch anyone of the royal family, especially without permission. If you do that, it is a serious, serious crime. And you notice that the eunuchs and his servants also realize the severity of what's happened. So when he announces, will he also assault the queen? It's thought to be a political assault, violent assault, or maybe even a sexual assault. However the king interpreted it, we don't know. But it was serious to him. So they covered his face. And look, in verse 9, it was one of the eunuchs who pointed out the gallows. What does that imply? What does that tell us? That even the eunuch standing from the outside, observing everything that has happened, realizes, hey, you have committed capital crimes here. And so he points out an option for capital punishment. So they took him and they hung him on the gallows that he had built for the man Mordecai. The weapon that he wanted to use became his tomb. It's like in Daniel, when they tried to trap Daniel in put him in the lion's den. At the end, what did they do? They brought him out and threw all the satraps who conspired against him into the lion's den. God doesn't just stop evil. He reorients it and turns it on himself. There is a time and a place, like Esther does in this text, to directly point out evil. The time for vague ambiguity was gone. The time to step up and call evil for what it is, call sin for what it is, was present. Hiding behind vague statements when the time has come to call evil what it is a cowardly maneuver. And sometimes we do this because we're afraid to offend outside the church and even inside the church. Now, it's not our goal to go out and offend people. That's not the objective. But offense is the byproduct of truth. The life of Christ bore that out. He went everywhere never intending to offend, but always speaking the truth. A lot of people took a lot of offense. The byproduct of the truth is offense. We can't be afraid to call evil for what it is, for pointing it out and saying this is sin, this is wrong, and here's what we need to do about it. We got a couple minutes. We can start a little bit of this. So since we've only got one more class, next week is our last class, so we'll have to pick up the pace a little bit, I suppose. But let's look a little bit at Esther saving the Jews. So Haman's dead, but his decree and everything that he has done still stands. Look at these first two verses. This is a great transfer of power and of wealth that happens in this instance, because the entire estate goes to Esther, it looks like. On that day, that same day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. In this chapter and the next chapter, Haman's entire lineage will be wiped out. His sons will be hanged, his whole lineage done. You remember that God had prophesied way back in Exodus that he would have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And you remember that Haman is an Agagite, that descendant of King Agag, the Amalekite. And it is in this book that the entire lineage, for all intents and purposes, the lineage is wiped out. On the same day, Ahasuerus transfers all of Haman's stuff over to Esther, and Esther puts Mordecai in charge of it. Mordecai gets Haman's signet ring. So in Persia, that's a symbol of friendship, but also it shows a transfer of power, that Mordecai is now going to be, or appears to be, the new second in command. And with that signet ring comes the power to write laws and new decrees. That's going to be critical for what we get to in this next section. This is God exalting the humble. The reward that Mordecai gets comes way late in his life. He has lived a faithful life. He has lived a good life. He has not expected anything for it. You remember in that previous chapter, after he'd gotten that great honor being paraded around the town, he went back and sat in the king's gate. Didn't ask for anything else. There are many times in many Bible characters and times in our own lives when the reward for doing what's right may come in eternity, but comes late in life. I remember one of the insights several months ago. You may remember that David Baker taught a class on the book of Exodus, and he noted that the most significant portion of Moses' life came in the final third of it. He lived in 3 40-year blocks. 40 years in Egypt, 40 years kind of being a shepherd, and then 40 years where pretty much everything that's written about him is recorded, and he does all that stuff. So don't write off that last section of your life as a Christian. It may be the most profound and powerful section of your life. So even though Haman's dead and gone, his decree lives on. The poor political decisions of evil men far outlive them sometimes. And we see that to be the case even today. So it's going to go to show that we need to be mindful of being involved and active so that we can prevent those type of things from happening, because negative effects can trickle down for years and generation. The decree of a dead man still puts the Jews at an ultimate risk here. All right, I guess we have to cut it off. I don't want to, but we'll have to cut it off and pick it up next time. So we'll wrap it up with the series finale and close out the book, and it ends good. It's really, of all the Bible stories and all the Bible books, it really is you might call it a happily ever after ending when we get to it. So we'll have chapter 8 and chapter 9. Chapter 10 is just 3 verses, so we should be able to work through it, no problem. Thank you so much for your attention, and we'll see you next week for the finale.
Come on in and get your seat for announcements. I know that's what you're looking forward to. What a great night to be together with the church. Excited about these good conversations that are going on. As I know we get to come here in the middle of our week and be an encouragement to each other, and we'll continue to do that. There's a few things I want to bring to your attention, as well as some challenges for you to be aware of. We've got a lot of events that are going on. We're at that time of the year, heading into the end of the year, where there's all the holiday parties and events that are happening. Keep a close eye on your bulletin that's coming out tomorrow, as well as any other emails that come out specifically to your groups about events and things that are going on. A couple of them that I want to remind you about tonight, just to push those things. Youth group, you guys have your Thanksgiving meal that's going to be this Friday. Let Cherry know tonight if you are attending and if you're bringing anybody with you, not just kids, but parents speak on your kids' behalf. So come see Cherry so they can account, make sure there is enough food for everyone. If you are a young professional, there's an event that's coming up. If you are not in the Facebook group or GroupMe, then please find Parker or Jake so they can get that handled. So if you are not in the Facebook group or on the GroupMe and you want to know more about the events and things that are going on for our young professionals, go see those guys and they will help you out. Also, another announcement. Nate and Isabella are hosting a Thanksgiving lunch on Thursday, November 27th. This is on Thanksgiving Day, if you didn't know that date. If any of you are without a family to eat with, for college students, you're still in town, or anyone who just wants to eat together a Thanksgiving meal, or maybe just another Thanksgiving meal if you want to start early on that one, get ready for your dinner, you are welcome to join them. Of course, their address is in the directory, but you can also go let them know so they can be prepared to have a place for you. But that's a really neat opportunity, and I'm glad that they are doing that. So be a part of that event. Let's see, other things that are happening. We've got next week is our last Wednesday night meal before we take a break for the winter. So if you want to be a part of that meal, we look forward to seeing you next week. But just be aware of that. That will be our last one until maybe somewhere in the mid-January. We'll let you know when that comes along. All right, special announcement. I need everybody to pay attention to this. Our food bank, as we've already sent out an email, is in full swing with a lot of work that's going on. Many of you have been helping, and that is awesome, and I know that they appreciate that. There's so much work to be done. You can see Amber Willingham or Barbara Raines to get more information, but here's what I want everybody to hear. Due to an increase in visitors, we are in need of non-perishable food items like flour, sugar, canned foods, pastas, grits, and juice. This is something we need. This week, they gave out 80-plus bags. They normally give out 40. They had 20-plus new people just this week that they are helping. Last week, it was 17 with 70-plus bags, which means next week we're going to have a lot more people that are coming through. We need supplies to help people. If you want to help by donating actual items, you can go to the store and purchase those. You can also give money specifically, and they will go and use that to buy resources as well. Or if you want to be the grocery shopper, we can put you to work in that as well. This is aside from the things we're able to get from the Montgomery Area Food Bank. Those are limited. Things that we get from other distributors, those are limited as well. In order to help people, and this many people, we need help with the goods, as well as just at packing bags and things along those lines. So if you can help in any way, there's an announcement that's going out in the bulletin tomorrow just as a reminder. But if you can help in any way, financially or by getting those, you can talk to one of these ladies or others that you know are helping with the food bank. And here's the purpose. These are souls that we get to reach out to. Hundreds of people that come to our church building every week, and they're getting to know people that are part of the church so that they can learn about God. And as we need to be praying about, that studies will come from this. That's why it matters. Okay, so keep that on your heart and your mind this evening and going onwards. Let's see. A couple other things. This Sunday afternoon, we've got song leading for the kiddos at 4 p.m. And then a couple of updates on our folks here. Adam Smith is going to be having his surgery. They traveled up to Ohio on Monday. It was a long day of travel and a long day of doctor's visits, but they're going to be checking in tomorrow at 6:15. Please be praying for that this surgery will go well in his recovery and travels on the way back. Also want to let you know that Don Willingham's brother, Larry, passed away. His funeral service, if anybody is wanting to go and support, it will be Saturday at Jefferson Memorial Funeral Home in Trussville. And so we'll also get that information out as well. Those are all the announcements I wrote down. Of course, if I missed something, let me know, and we'll be able to share that as we go along. But at this time, we'll have our devotional together.
If you're using the songbook tonight, the invitation song will be number 453. 453. And before that, turn a page to the left and we'll sing 452. Standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages let His praises ring. Glory in the highest I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, I cannot fall. Listening every moment to the Spirit's call. Resting in my Savior as my all in all. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God.
Good evening, church. Thank you for having us back here tonight. Thank you for being here tonight. It's so encouraging to see fellow Christians gathered together to fellowship with one another. Before we get started, big thanks to those who helped in the kitchen tonight. That was some really awesome taco soup. So we college students really appreciate that. So tonight for our Devo, I want to branch off of what Nate has been talking about with us in our college class about the family of God, being adopted into the family of God. He's taken us through things like what it means to wear the name Christian, what the gift of the Holy Spirit means to us, what the character of God is, and the grace He extends to us, and a bunch more stuff that we're not going to talk about tonight. But after the Devo, if you want to ask Nate about everything that he's taught us this semester, you should do that. He would love that. So tonight, if you're following along with us, we're going to be in Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, verses 15 through 17. Romans chapter 8 follows along really nicely. We actually talked about it tonight in class. That was a really pleasant surprise. It ties in nicely with what Ephesians teaches us about being predestined for adoption. Let's read verses 15 through 17 together. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit Himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with Him, in order that we may also be glorified with Him. So I want you to notice in the beginning of verse 15, this is where we're really going to dig in tonight, that Paul says we do not receive a spirit of slavery, but one of adoption. You see, in the first few chapters of Romans, Paul talks about how all mankind, Jew and Gentile alike, has sinned and fallen short of glory. Those without the knowledge of the truth transgressed the law of their conscience, and those with the law could not follow it. When you look at verse 15, I want you to think back to the Egyptian captivity of the Israelites. And after they were freed, and they were in the wilderness and kind of wandering around aimlessly for a short time, they wanted to go back into captivity because at least it was familiar. At least they knew where they would lay their head at night. At least they knew that they would have a meal, right? Captivity is not cool. Nobody wants to be enslaved, but the Israelites still longed for that even after God had set them free. Paul writes here in Romans chapter 8 that is not the spirit that God sends for us. We do not receive a spirit of captivity, but one of freedom. Immediately after Paul writes this, he creates this little tension, and the contrast he creates with that statement, and he says that we are to receive the gift of adoption, we are accepted as sons and daughters of God. Paul's use of the word Abba Father, indicates a deep, intimate relationship with the Father. He deeply desires to know you and to love you. The inspired writer in Hosea writes in chapter 2 that God desires to be married to his people. He desires an intimate bond with each and every one of us, and that they shall know their Lord. So tonight, church, the invitation is open to you. The opportunity to be adopted into the family of God is open to you. Paul makes sure that we understand in the book of Romans that God is not a vending machine. We don't just push the right buttons and say the right things and go up and get dunked in the water so that we may be extended grace. That's not how it works. He hears those who cry to him, Abba, Father, and he will hear you tonight. If you seek the prayers of the church, please come make your request known. If you wish to join the family, God's adopted family, and have your sins washed away to be raised to a newness of life through the blood of Jesus Christ, please come now as we stand and sing.
Let's pray together. Dear Lord, thank you for letting us have this time this evening to all come together as a church to worship you and to learn more about your word. Father, I pray that as we go about the rest of this week, that we are encouraged by you and by this time we have together to remain faithful, to just keep carrying on, to bear your name in all the places we go. I pray this in your Son's name. Amen.